My name is Huntermoon and I am a certified permaculture teacher. This is Horticulture Farm Community. It's a 33-acre integrated permaculture farm with several different types of silvopasture implemented here. And we have hedgerows that are intentionally designed to have animals integrated into them as they mature. We have living fences that are pruned to feed the livestock. And here we are in my forest garden, and around us are elderberries. To my left here is California bay laurel with its first fruit. They have edible nuts. When you think about the quintessential wild forest landscape, the healthy, multi-storied, understory, overstory, mid-sized plants, openings, deep shade, that kind of diverse landscape is actually not wild. It's actually shaped by humans. The eastern woodlands forest of the US and the Amazon forest, there's actually anthropological evidence that it was shaped by humans. Humans make forests because it's a great way to provide food, fiber, and other needs for themselves without having to do a lot of labor. It's a lot more efficient than an annual agriculture system. So when you're designing and planting a food forest, you're making an ecosystem, a grove of trees to live in. It's a place where you have a role to play in coming out and taking care of the health of the ecosystem, and the plants also have a role to play. A food forest will be different from an orchard in that many orchards are one kind of tree. In a food forest, you want to have a lot of diversity. So a typical orchard might be 100% apples. In a food forest, you want to think, okay, maybe 10% apples, maybe 10% pears, 10% plums. Okay, now we have 30% in the same plant family. What else can we plant in this orchard that will cause it to be a food forest and not all the same like an orchard would be? One of the benefits of having a diversity of different crops in your food forest is that you're more likely to have a wide harvest window. So I have berries that start ripening in May, and I have tree fruits that ripen in December. And from May till December, I'm harvesting some fruit or nut or herb or other kind of harvest from my food forest. Another strength of a diverse system like this is it helps you get resilience in the face of climatic disasters or weird weather or stressors that come from outside of your farm system. That maybe one year the apples don't pollinate very well because you get a hailstorm right in the middle of the flowering season, but the persimmons still make a big crop. So you want to be thinking about, how can I have something to eat from this food forest that I live in, even if this year this particular type of tree doesn't do very well. A guild is a relationship between different species of plants in a food forest. This happens in nature too, but in a food forest we're talking about how humans design. So a human would think of a guild in terms of, okay, my primary overstory species may be pears, and I need species that will provide habitat for pollinators. I also need nitrogen fixation. I also need mineral accumulation. I also need something beautiful that attracts humans to the landscape. There's a multiple functions theme. One of the benefits of having diversity as a goal is that it helps you try things that you wouldn't try before. So I have plants in my orchard that I never would have thought of putting in if I hadn't been thinking, how can I get more diversity? For example, the red currants right in front of us, maybe not the tastiest fruit, but ripening early in the season and making really great jelly. And then behind you, there's a medlar tree. Most people have never heard of a medlar tree. It was the most commonly planted fruit tree in Europe during the Middle Ages. And the fruit ripens in December when there's almost nothing else to harvest in your orchard. Behind me is the living willow fence, made from a basket variety called Polish purple. They're really beautiful. People walk into my garden and just gape at the living willow fences. I use living willow fences on the edges of the orchard to provide separation of space and habitat. A hedgerow is normally plants that are allowed to grow sort of in their natural shape. And a living willow fence is very heavily changed by humans. So these willows were planted on a diagonal 8 inches apart, crossed in a diamond pattern and tied together. That's called pleaching, when we tie them together with the intention that they will graft to themselves. And when you cut the growth off, you see the permanent frame is this diamond pattern. It does not look like a tree. It actually looks like a fence. A living willow fence can provide a lot of the same habitat benefits that you would expect from a hedgerow, but it's just tighter and more controlled. It takes up less space, and it forms a different kind of boundary in your system. Several of my fences are varieties that are intended for forage. So in August and September, I prune one side of the fence. and I use the prunings to feed the sheep and the goats. Part of the reason I planted hedgerows and living fences is because I have this big open field that I wanted to plant an orchard in. And in the summer, we've got these really heavy, hot, punishing winds coming across these big open fields in my neighborhood. For me, the main windbreak is the hedgerow on the north side of my orchard. So in the summer, these winds come down from the north, and it's really difficult to get young fruit trees to establish in that situation. I've actually had plants on the north edge of my hedgerow. Now these are irrigated plants that are there specifically to block the wind. I've had them completely turn brown on the north side where the wind is facing them. They're still green on the south side where they protect themselves a bit from the wind. And it's a really dramatic visual effect of the impact of having some plants that are a little bit sacrificed. Like, okay, you stop the wind, and then the plants on the other side get protected from that wind so they don't lose the moisture they need to keep growing. You might be really excited to plant your fruit trees, but you need to think about the boundaries and how you're protecting those fruit trees. So hedgerows and windbreaks, they might start out feeling like kind of the boring part where you're planting natives on the edge and who really cares, but actually they end up being a major part of what protects the crop that you're providing for yourself. But then once I knew I needed a windbreak, I started thinking, what else can the trees do for me? It's an experimental zone. Can I produce fruit? Can I produce nuts? Can I plant natives to provide habitat for insects and other creatures who live here? Oh, how about basket material? Right, so there's just a lot going on in this hedgerow, and sometimes it ends up being kind of an orchard overflow. Like, I don't have enough room for the different apples I want to grow. I'm going to put a few in the hedgerow. One of the first plants I put out here was black locust, because black locust is a nitrogen fixer and can provide shade and shelter for the other plants that I'm putting in the hedgerow. Here I have hawthorns. I planted a type of hawthorn that is supposed to have really good berries to make medicinal products. This is aronia, which is a very wet tolerant edible berry. There's a wild cherry that volunteered back there, native blue elderberries, some Oregon ash, red alder, American persimmons. This part of the hedgerow is on the edge of the most similar to a monocrop of what I have on my land, which is about half an acre of just chestnuts, alley cropped with grass and sheep. You know, half an acre of just one primary species means that you're reducing the habitat for other creatures. And you know, what's going to happen if we say there's nothing to eat here except chestnuts? We're going to attract only the creatures who eat chestnuts. Then we start having pest problems. So having a hedgerow on the edge of that that's wild and diverse in species is part of my effort to say, we're not just going to have chestnuts. Here, go eat over there. Go hang out over there. There's your habitat. There's your place. And I'm going to make sure that we don't make things so simple around here that there's not a place for you. I've seen so many more birds and other animals since I planted the hedgerow. There's a heron. They're probably going to take food to their babies. They have nests in our trees. I actually come out here for stress relief, to just sit in the hedgerow and observe the natural processes that are happening, which trees are doing well, which trees are dying. It's a place where I go to learn and rest. Tree crops are really important for resilience. They provide more food with less human labor in the same amount of space over time. But there is a lag time in between planting and having a marketable harvest. So in that lag time, you want to start thinking about how to diversify the crops from that area. This area is chestnuts planted on wide spacing between rows, but on very close spacing within the row. So I come in here and thin them out. Planting close together allows me to have a larger crop when the trees are younger, but then I have to be brutal and come cut out the trees as they get older and they need more space. And you don't have to leave bare ground in between the trees while they're maturing. There's quite a few years where you've got plants that don't need that much room. They will eventually, but they don't need it now. So then you can think about staging in terms of timing, saying, okay, while they're young, I'm going to plant them too close together and thin them out. Or while they're young, I'm going to have other crops growing in between. Or in my case, I'm saying while they're young and also while they're older, I'm going to run livestock between the rows. So starting with a 40-foot spacing between rows, that pairs really well with putting some kind of livestock in between the rows. Silvopasture is the intentional combining of trees and shrubs with grass and livestock. There's a lot of different ways to do that. And in this case, this is an orchard. So I wanted to plant trees for fruits and nuts. And then I thought, how can I integrate livestock into an orchard? So the fruit tree's on 40-foot wide rows. This row is plums, and there's thimbleberry in between the plums. There's also hazelnuts here, pears, apples, walnuts, a lot of shrubs in between the trees. The trees are all quite young here, so the shrubs in between allow me to have a crop before the trees mature enough to set fruit. So thimbleberries, aronia berries, gummy berries, thornless blackberries, currants, gooseberries, honeyberries. 40-foot rows is a lot wider than what is normally done in a conventional orchard system. So in this system, the rows are wider to allow for water catchment, to allow for grass-based animal farming. It suits me to come out and take care of my sheep and my trees at the same time. I do a lot of summer pruning at the time when the grass isn't very good forage for the livestock because I don't irrigate the grass. And then the prunings get fed to the animals. So that increases the on-farm food sources for the sheep and the goats. In the spring, when the grass is growing really fast, I can move the sheep in between the fruit trees and have them mow for me. In the winter, when the water catchment is holding water in the swales, I can put the ducks in here and they have the water they need and they're adding fertility to the land. One thing that's great about ducks is that they eat slugs and snails. So you can have them help reduce that problem in your garden and orchard. The kinds of ducks that I raise are Ancona ducks, and they're a dual purpose breed. They don't want to fly. They're easy to herd back and forth between different areas. I use electric poultry netting, but I don't even electrify it because I have dogs to help with predators. So I can visually see the difference between areas where I have run the ducks between my rows and where I have not yet started running the ducks between my rows. In the spring, the grass grows a lot faster and is a lot greener and lusher where the ducks have been. And this is with a rotational system. So the ducks are there until there's enough impact to visually say, oh, I need to move them, and then they move to a different area. And I have about 8 areas that I rotate the ducks through and about 4 more areas that are farther away from their night house, and I just haven't started rotating them through there yet. And I can visually see after only 5 years the difference in grass fertility. So we have a lot of pastures in this area that are completely free of trees and shrubs. It's all grass. And I've noticed in the 20 years I've been farming that my sheep are more prone to sunburn and more prone to heat exhaustion and are just stressed out more now than they were 10 or 15 years ago. So I'm looking at my pastures with no shade and thinking, how can I add shade? And if I'm adding shade, I'm also going to think, how can I add fodder? Unless you irrigate, the grass is done being available for food in August. But the trees still have green leaves that are good food for the sheep. So once the trees are older, I'll have multiple functions being provided by those trees: shade, fodder, protection from wind and rain. If you are planting trees and shrubs specifically for silvopasture, you want to look at their qualities, like, are they good fodder? Do they make good medicine? When is the fodder available for your animals? Is it fruit? Is it nuts? Is it leaves? What part of the fodder is going to be useful in your system? There's a lot of changes happening in the climate and in the economy right now, and increasing the diversity of our income sources and our product sources is a really important part of farming. We have the opportunity to work with nature, to say, this is not just a monocrop of one type of product, that we're going to think about how many different types of yield can we get from this landscape. And so for me, silvopasture is a way to say, I have yields from tree crops, I have yields from shrub crops, I have yields from livestock. I'm going to use the grass to be feeding me through feeding my animals. How can I have my animals clean up the pests under my trees? How can I have my animals add fertility under my trees? How can I do as much as possible what this landscape needs without taking in inputs from outside the landscape? Because I might not be able to get those inputs from outside the landscape if we have another situation like a pandemic with shutdowns and supply chain issues. Like, how can I make sure that my farm landscape gets what it needs without me being dependent on things that are vulnerable to collapsing? I think it was Jean Logston who said, we're not planting an orchard, we're planting a grove of trees to live in. And I definitely feel like this is a landscape that I belong in and that I like to spend time in. I'm not just out here to do the work that needs to be done, I'm out here to have a relationship with other aspects of my community.